100,000 men moved through the dusk like a slow, grinding machine. The Austrian camp sprawled across the plains near Karansebes, a city of canvas and steel stretching toward the horizon.
Emperor Joseph II sat in his tent, listening to the cacophony outside. It was a storm of tongues.
Germans shouted orders to Hungarians who looked at them with blank stares. Croats, Italians, and Serbs moved in their own clusters, their commands clashing in the humid air. There was no single rhythm to this army, only 1,000 conflicting pulses. Every movement required a translator, every maneuver a gamble. The air was heavy with the smell of wet earth and unwashed bodies, a pressure cooker of ambition and deep-seated misunderstanding. Joseph too watched the maps, but the maps were silent. He could not hear the friction building in the ranks, the way the language barrier frayed the nerves of every officer. They were a massive, blind giant, stumbling toward a confrontation they were not prepared to survive. The sun dipped below the hills, casting long shadows over the thousands of fires flickering in the dark. The stage was set. The tragedy was already in motion. The vanguard of hussars crossed the Timish River under the cover of a moonless night. They expected resistance, a shadow of an Ottoman scout, but found only local travelers guarding barrels of schnapps.
The soldiers did not hesitate. They broke the seals, and the party began in the tall grass.
By midnight, the air was thick with the scent of spirits. When a group of infantry arrived,
drawn by the rowdy laughter, they pushed their way into the circle, demanding their portion. The hussars, swaying and aggressive, slammed the barrels shut. They refused to share. Shouts escalated into shoves, and then a heavy iron canteen flew through the air, striking a man in the chest. Fists replaced words. The infantry lunged, grabbing for the wood, while the hussars swung their sabers to keep them back. They were no longer soldiers of the same crown. They were enemies fighting over a burning desire to drink.
They tore down a nearby fence to build a makeshift barricade, dragging crates and discarded gear into a pile. The line was drawn in the mud. The infantry stood on one side, the hussars on the other, both sides breathing heavy, waiting for the next spark to ignite the darkness. The standoff held for a heartbeat. Men on both sides stood frozen, chests heaving, fingers gripped tight around wood and steel. The air felt brittle, ready to shatter. Then, a single, sharp crack pierced the silence.
A gunshot. It did not matter who fired or why. The sound was the catalyst. In the darkness, the noise was absolute. A voice screamed from the gloom, raw and frantic, "Tercy! Tercy!" The word cut through the night like a blade. The infantrymen froze, their anger replaced by a cold, sudden dread. Across the barricade, the hussars did not wait to confirm the threat. They turned, abandoning the barrels, and scrambled into the darkness. Panic was a physical weight. It surged through the ranks, turning soldiers into a stampede. They tripped over their own gear, shoved one another aside, and bolted toward the main camp. The order of the vanguard dissolved into a blind, desperate frenzy. Every shadow now looked like an enemy, and every footstep behind them sounded like a charge. They ran not because they saw the Turks, but because the fear of them had become the only reality that mattered. The retreat had begun, and there was no force on earth that could stop the tide of men now running for their lives. The stampede hit the main camp like a landslide. Men collided with tents, tripping over guy ropes, screaming into the dark. Officers scrambled to the front, frantic and red-faced, desperate to stem the tide. They drew their swords and roared, "Halt! Halt!" into the blackness. But the soldiers,
terrified and unable to understand the German tongue, heard only a war cry. "Allah! Allah!" they shrieked back.
Convinced the Ottoman tide had reached the gates, the commander of the artillery, blind with fear and isolated by the noise, took the cry as his signal. He gave the order. Cannons erupted. The roar of the guns shattered the night, blasting grape shot directly into the retreating mass of their own comrades. the air filled with screams and the wet thud of iron hitting flesh. In the center of the madness, Emperor Joseph II tried to rally his guard, but the surge of bodies was an unstoppable force. His horse reared, panicked by the thunder of the guns, and collapsed. The emperor hit the mud hard. He was shoved, kicked, and trampled by his own panicked men, disappearing beneath a tide of heavy boots. The entire army was now firing at shadows, killing friends in the dark and tearing their own ranks to pieces in a frenzy of self-destruction. The sun crawled over the horizon, casting a pale, unforgiving light across the valley. It revealed a landscape of ruin. Thousands of men lay still in the mud, broken by the very cannons meant to protect them.
There were no Turkish flags, no Ottoman blades, no enemy scouts, just a vast,
silent graveyard of a once mighty army. For 2 days, the silence held, heavy and absolute.
Then, the horizon began to vibrate. Grand Vizier Koka Yusuf Pasha appeared at the head of his forces, expecting a bloody confrontation. He slowed his horse as he reached the perimeter. He saw abandoned wagons, overturned supply crates, and rows of lifeless bodies, but not a single soldier stood to face him. He rode through the ghost camp, his men watching in stunned disbelief. There was no resistance. There were no walls to breach. The Austrians had dismantled themselves in a single night of drunken terror, leaving the battlefield to an enemy who had not even drawn a sword. It was the most absurd military collapse in history.
A tragedy sparked by a simple barrel of schnapps and finished by the darkness itself. The war had ended before it truly began.